Some opening shot thoughts. There is one person who could shed light on the Epstein scandal and add to our understanding of how deep the rot went. No, it's not convicted accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell. More on who in a second, but first, Illinois Senator Dick Durbin, in fact, says there's something that smells very fishy about the Department of Justice's secretive meeting last week with Maxwell under the auspices that she might reveal a client list. Quote, given her documented record of lying and her desire to secure early release, there are serious concerns that Ms. Maxwell may provide false information or selectively withhold information in return for a pardon or sentence commutation. Quote, potential for a corrupt bargain between the Trump administration and Ghislaine Maxwell and the impact this would have on the victims and survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and Ms. Maxwell's horrific abuses are factors, Durbin says, in calling for the release of any kind of documents about that meeting. Now, that meeting comes ostensibly to quell the firestorm on the right and the left after Trump's Attorney General Pam Bondi announced there were no more Epstein files to release and President Trump's exhortations then to move on from the whole affair. It's a bitter pill to swallow since President Trump and Bondi and countless influencers in the Trump orbit got significant mileage, promising their base in the country that all would be revealed soon. So this is a self-made crisis that President Trump has struggled to redirect the messaging on. Today, seeming to imply that his arch enemies might have planted his name in the Epstein files.
The whole thing is a hoax. They ran the files. I was running against somebody that ran the files. If they had something, they would have released. Now, they can easily put something in the files that's a phony.
Now, to be clear, there isn't a trace of evidence to support what the president is saying. And today, Ghislaine Maxwell's attorney filed an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court asking to overturn her conviction. If Durbin's hunch is right and there's something untoward being cooked up where Maxwell gives misleading testimony in return for her conviction to be vacated, it might add more fuel to the Epstein-Trump fire rather than make it go away. Maxwell's given every indication that she can't be trusted, so I'm not sure what she has to add to our understanding of this sordid scandal. But, as I said before, there is someone who might, who Congress has yet to subpoena. And that is Alexander Acosta, the former U.S. attorney in southern Florida who cut the secretive sweetheart deal with Epstein back in 2008, confounding victims and legal experts alike. You might recall Acosta later became the labor secretary in President Trump's first term before resigning in disgrace when that deal came to light. What did he know? When did he know it? And why did he essentially let Epstein roam free despite mountains of evidence of his crimes? Now that would make for bombshell testimony.
Coming up on Paris on Politics.
A new report shows Chicago's violent crime rate is trending down, way down. What's behind the encouraging numbers and can it continue? Carnage in Gaza. Israel's prime minister denies starvation, but a Chicago physician who has visited numerous times tells a different story. A new report shows the Chicago Teachers Union gearing up to spend big in the next election.
This is Paris on Politics from Fox 32 Chicago.
Welcome to Paris on Politics. Some promising new data shows Chicago's crime rate is trending down, way down. So what is behind these encouraging numbers and will it continue? And joining us is Ernesto Lopez from the Council on Criminal Justice. Mr. Lopez, thanks for talking to us. Put this into context. How much are homicides down in Chicago during the first half of the year?
Sure. When we look at the data in Chicago, we see that homicides are about 33% lower the first 6 months of 2025 compared to the first 6 months of 2024. And it's really important to see that it declined because from 2019 to 2021, homicides were up by about 59%. And when we take a longer view, looking at that first half of 2019 to the first half of 2025, homicides are 25% lower the first half of this year.
And where does that fit into the nationwide trends? Because we've heard that the big cities across the country, like Baltimore, they're seeing big drops. Where does Chicago fit in?
Yeah, I think Chicago is a little lower than some of those cities, but definitely higher than some. About half the cities we've studied still have higher homicide rates than pre-2020 levels. But you look at cities like Chicago and St. Louis that typically have had higher homicide rates than Chicago. Their numbers are a little larger of a decline. I think they've experienced declines a little bit earlier. But still, when we look at across our sample, the sample of the cities that about 70, excuse me, there's about a 17% decline on average across these large U.S. cities. And then when we take that longer look from 2025 to 2019, again, the first half of the year, we see there's a 14%. So a lot of cities are going down, but still many cities are above their pre-2020 levels.
And that's important because there was a huge spike in 2020, and then it slowly started to come down after 2021. So we're saying now that Chicago is 20 to 25% lower than COVID, pre-COVID then. So that's a significant accomplishment. Is there anything to indicate why this is happening across the nation?
It's difficult to say why. And one of the factors that really complicates this is when we take a close look at the data, you actually find that homicide was increasing before the pandemic, before the murder of George Floyd, before the summer protests. So that really complicates the story that we're seeing. And there's these various declines that are occurring at different times. So that's not to say that we can never figure out what's going on with the homicide trends. However, we need more data. We need to better understand how these cities are moving and what other factors, whether it's unemployment, drug markets, violence prevention programs that are on the ground in many cities, how effective have these programs have been? So there's a lot of factors that we still have to look at.
That's interesting because it's one of the factors I brought up with the U Chicago crime lab. There are billions of dollars in COVID relief money in cities like Chicago. A lot of that money went to violence prevention, job training, workforce programs. Does that maybe give some indication that maybe there's a connection there?
Yeah, something that's been promising is a lot of these large cities the last few years have been implementing evidence-based reduction programs. And so while it's good that cities are selecting programs that have some research grounding, we still want to ensure that we're continually monitoring the success of those programs, make sure that they are being implemented the way they are designed. And it's also important to keep in mind that a program that may be implemented in St. Louis or Boston may not have the exact effectiveness in another city. So that's why it's important to keep monitoring. But at the same time, we also have to ensure that, or we don't want to say that a specific program is driving these declines without really solid evidence.
Do you think that this drop can continue throughout the second half of the year, both in Chicago and across the country?
Yeah, I think there's a good chance that we'll still see declines occurring the second half of 2025. However, once we start getting into 2026, it's really hard to tell because in 2024 we had a historic low in homicide. Homicide was as low as it was in 2014 we had a historic low in homicide, the lowest homicide rate since going back to 1960, and yet 2 years later we had a pretty noticeable bump by about 20%. So, you know, it's one thing that when these numbers drop, we can't expect them to keep dropping, but it's a question of how far they can, how low they can really go.
And what about other categories of crime, carjackings, sexual assault?
Yeah, so one thing we see with carjackings is that there's been a large decline with carjacking. There was a huge spike in 2020, 2021, even going into 2022. The sample cities we look at is pretty small, so it's kind of hard to draw any national sort of conclusions from there, but we're seeing large declines there. Same with sexual assault. We're seeing declines there where sexual assault is about 10% lower the first half of 2025 compared to the first half of 2024. One more crime we've really paid close attention to over the years is motor vehicle theft. Motor vehicle theft saw large increases from 2022 to 2023 across the nation. And when we're looking at all these different crime types, we examined 13 crime types. The only crime that is still well above pre-pandemic levels is motor vehicle theft. The first half of 2025, motor vehicle theft was about 25% higher than in the first half of 2019.
So that continues to go up, and I think a lot of folks' car insurance rates are reflecting that. Ernesto Lopez, but some other promising numbers there. Thank you very much for illuminating that for us.
Thank you.
You bet. And the Chicago Teachers Union is gearing up to spend millions of its members' dues trying to elect more candidates to office. The CTU is Mayor Brandon Johnson's core supporter, of course, and might need a lot of that money to defend his incumbency against a field of potential challengers. And joining us now is Austin Berg, a senior researcher at the Illinois Policy Institute, a libertarian-leaning think tank. Hey, Austin, so you were leaked a memo that showed the CTU's balance sheet here, and it kind of indicates they're about to spend pretty big on some future elections. How big and what elections?
The documents that were shared with us showed that the union plans to spend $4 million on local races, at the very least, ahead of the 2026 Chicago School Board elections. And this is just part of a pattern that we've seen where the Chicago Teachers Union really only spends about 20% of the money it raises on representational activities, the things that most folks would associate with the union, representing employees and grievances and things of that nature. Just 20 cents of every dollar really goes to that. The rest of it is for politics, for overhead, for other leadership priorities. And that's why more and more people are recognizing this as a new political machine, a dominant political machine in Chicago, though it's had some high-profile losses lately.
Certainly the dominant political machine in Chicago in the last couple of years, and 20%, that's a staggeringly low number of teachers' dues going back to teacher representation. What about the mayor's race? I mean, you would think that they want to spend money to perhaps defend the crown, so to speak, but it's going to be tough given the mayor's approval ratings.
Absolutely. And it's also going to be tough based on the fact that their money itself has become a liability for a lot of candidates. So folks may remember the Bring Chicago Home proposal, $100 million real estate transfer tax hike that was on the ballot last spring. CTU spent big, put a lot of manpower behind that. They were tied to the issue and it lost at the ballot box. Then again, you saw in November the first ever school board races in the history of the city of Chicago. We elected 9 seats that were competitive. CTU should have expected to win about 6 of those 9. They lost 6 of those 9 because those candidates really had to apologize to voters and defend a lot of the behavior of union leadership. So that money, while it might be a lot in certain races, is sort of a double-edged sword.
And, you know, there are 20 of these elected school board districts that they're going to have to run candidates in, or candidates will be running in. You add to that the mayor's race, you add to that county board races that they've, supported over the years, state house races. Is $4 million going to be enough to cover all of their priorities?
Paris, that's what's been really interesting in public officials reaching out after we published this report at the Chicago Policy Center. They're saying, wait, that's it? They only have $4 million to spend on these local races, and that's before they get into the mayor's race and the city council races. We see city council gearing up for this budget fight with Mayor Brandon Johnson. A lot of aldermen are looking at this and saying, oh, there's a lot more bark than bite in the CTU right now. There's no way they're going to have enough money to defend Brandon Johnson and to defend a lot of the aldermen who are planning to stand with him as he tries to pass really unpopular tax hikes this year.
And you were also reporting last week, I think, Austin, that Stacey Davis Gates, the CTU president, might be in line for somewhat of a promotion. Is that right?
That's right. We've heard from several sources that she is planning to take over the presidency of the Illinois Federation of Teachers. Your viewers can think of that as basically the parent union to the CTU that represents teachers all across the state. She already has a paid position at the IFT, but that presidency would really allow her and Vice President of CTU, Jackson Potter, to funnel teacher dues statewide into Chicago political races. Now, there's a double-edged sword to that too. IFT members can opt out of the union and decide not to pay those dues to fund Chicago politics.
All right, Austin Berg from the Illinois Policy Institute with a couple of intriguing reports here about the Chicago Teachers Union and their plans for the upcoming election. Austin, thanks very much.
Thanks, Paris.
We enable humanitarian aid throughout the duration of the war to enter Gaza. Otherwise, there would be no Gazans. Hamas robs, steals this humanitarian aid, and then accuses Israel of not supplying it.
We made a contribution a week ago of $60 million, all going into food. We only hope the food goes to the people that need it, because so much, as you know, when you do something there, it gets taken by Hamas or somebody, but it gets taken. and we're prepared to help. You know, we want to help. It's a terrible situation.
President Trump there signaling he's not necessarily buying Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's claims that Israel Defense Forces are blocking food aid to Gaza and that Gazans are indeed starving. And joining us to give a glimpse of conditions on the ground is Chicago-based physician Dr. Zaire Salul, who visited the war-torn region earlier this year with the humanitarian group Med Global. And you've made multiple visits there in other crisis zones in the world. Dr. Salul, good to talk to you again. You saw there the Netanyahu denying that that Israel is blocking any of that aid. He's saying Hamas is actually stealing it. You've been there and you have folks on the ground there now. Does that square with what you've observed, what they're observing?
Definitely not. I think we should believe our eyes. When you're seeing these scenes of children who are dying because of severe malnutrition, when you're seeing adults fighting for food, even though that they know that they will be killed on the food line. When I talked with our director in Gaza, and she told me that she lost 20 kilograms, she's a physician, and that she's been eating lentil for the past 3 months, and that she cannot find food in the market even if they're trying. We had in our clinic, we have a stabilization clinic to treat children with malnutrition. We had 5 children below age of 5 who died in the last week. And the number of admissions to the hospital with severe acute malnutrition, which is medical emergency, increased by 200% compared to last month only. So I think we are reaching an inflection point that everyone who is familiar with the impact of this blockade on famine and malnutrition is reaching to the same conclusion, including President Trump, that there is a famine.
And we're looking at some of the pictures of you in Gaza. Can you just give us a sense of what it is like on the ground there? They're treating some folks that apparently have been in a blast zone or have had injuries. What can you explain to the viewers about your experience there?
I've been in Ukraine, in Syria, in Yemen, in other war zones, and I've been in Gaza 4 times. But this last time was the most painful. The war was unfolding in front of our eyes. You see the fighter jets, the missiles, the impact of these bombs on civilians and children. And I worked in a hospital called Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, a city in southern Gaza. At that time, we lived in Rafah, which is now completely destroyed. And every day we were seeing mass casualty events after mass casualty events. And I remember one of these mass casualty events where we had 38 injured people who came to the hospital, flooded the emergency room. Half of them were children. We had to resuscitate the children in the floor of the emergency room. I put 2 chest tubes without even local anesthesia because there was no local anesthesia. One of the children, he had surgery, but then he did not make it. I remember his name. His name is Khalil. I took a picture of his death certificate, and I showed it to President Biden last year because I wanted him to know that behind these numbers, 18,000 children, are people, are children who have aspiration, who dream to probably be doctors in the future. And this is a tragedy that we are witnessing. The situation since then has got worse. And right now we are seeing children dying of malnutrition. We have adults, pregnant women who are admitted to the hospitals. People are collapsing in the street and admitted to the hospital because of low immunity and infections. So this is a terrible situation, and it is man-made famine. Last time we've seen these scenes were in Ethiopia when I was growing in high school, and we've seen similar scenes of children, which led to 250,000 people who died in Ethiopia. But that was related to drought and climate change. This time it's man-made.
And is that because of increased bombings, increased war, or is it because of the blockade of supplies that the world is trying to get in there?
3 things that happened in the last few months. Of course, we have a war now for 22 months. We had complete blockade for the past 3 months by the Israeli army that prevented trucks from getting in from Egypt and Jordan. The average number of trucks getting into Gaza right now is about 25 trucks per day. Before the war, it was 500 trucks. When we had ceasefire, it was about 500 trucks. Gaza needs 1,000 trucks every day. It's not enough. And also we had systematic destruction of agriculture, of irrigation, of universities, of schools, anything that make Gaza livable. Gazans right now, 2.1 million of them, are squeezed into 15% of the land of Gaza. And also we replaced the United Nations system of distribution of aid where we used to distribute food and aid in 400 spots. And now it's only in 4 spots. So we are creating bottlenecks by what's called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that is run by the Israeli army. And that's what's causing this chaos and killing zones that Gazans are fighting to reach these foods.
And President Trump today basically indicating he doesn't think Netanyahu's really being fully on the level here and that he will step up United States aid. But how much will that help, do you think?
I think it will help a little, but definitely what is needed is more than just aid. Because as I've mentioned, there's a systematic destruction of what's make Gaza livable for the people of Gaza. I asked our director, Dr. Salwa Al-Tibi, if the borders were open, what's the percentage of Gazans who will leave Gaza? She said 80%. So besides the aid, I think what we need to do is to make sure that Palestinians in Gaza have hope for the future, and there is a construction plan for the future, and also empowerment of the local communities. Aid enough is not enough, but people should have hope.
When you go to Gaza, how do you get there?
When I went to Gaza, I went through Rafah border crossing from Egypt, which has been closed now for more than a year or so. But right now we have a team on the ground that just entered Gaza from Jordan through Israel to Karam Abu Salim or the Abu Shalom border crossing. And they are received by our local community. Most of our programs are run by our local team. We have 300 doctors and nurses who run 16 clinics, and they provide health care to 4,000 patients every day.
And this isn't, you are a full-time doctor here in the Chicago area, and Med Global is made up of full-time doctors who are going here in their spare time, if you can say that, to do this service. But I think you were telling me earlier that sometimes you're not sure if you can get across the border. If Israel has to let you go, don't they?
We are part of the World Health Organization's Emergency Medical Team initiative. So we go through the WHO. And sometimes, and it happened that we had clearance from Kogat, which is part of the Israeli army that is responsible for the blocking or allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza. And sometimes they allow you, and then they block you at the last minute. Dr. John Kaler, who is the co-founder of Med Global, was allowed to get into Jordan, but then he was blocked from getting into Gaza just last month.
That's very tricky. Given what you've seen, given what your team is seeing right now on the ground, there's a debate over this. Is it fair to characterize this as a genocide?
I think everyone is reaching to the same conclusions, including Israeli human rights organizations. What we are seeing is systemic destruction of civilian infrastructure, squeezing the population, forced displacement of the population to the south, which is a non-livable area. Rafah is completely leveled. There is also destruction of towns in the north. And we have, of course, more than 60,000 people who were killed, 18,000 children who were killed, 130,000 people who were injured. We have a famine, we have a malnutrition. If this is not genocide, then what it is genocide?
Dr. Zahir Sallul, and I know you're about to go to Syria as well. You've been all over these war-torn regions of the world, and it's always fascinating to speak with you. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you, Pat.
Best of luck to you.
Welcome.